Hello there, welcome to a financial mathematics video on simple interest. Simple interest: when an amount of money is borrowed or loaned, interest is charged. If one person borrows an amount of money, they have to pay the interest. The person who loaned them that money, they get that interest given to them. So for one person, interest is a pain in the neck. For another person, interest is like a part of an income. So it depends on whether you're borrowing or lending, really. But interest is charged because you're letting another person, if you're lending someone money, you're letting them use that money for a certain length of time, and there's a bit of a price to that. We can think of interest as a bit of a price for the use of money. With simple interest, though, the interest amount is always calculated based on the principal amount that is borrowed or lent. So we always do our calculations on the original amount that got borrowed, not some sort of ongoing rolling amount. And the simple interest formula that we're going to be having a look at is I equals PRN. I equals P times R times N. We'll have a look at the parts of that now. I stands for the amount of interest that's either earned or paid for, depending on whether you're an investor or a borrower. And P, it's called the principal. It's the original amount of money borrowed or lent to someone. So that's the main amount of money that's borrowed. And the R stands for the interest rate per period. So it might be an interest rate per month or per year. And it's always expressed in either percentage or decimal form. Often it's in the question it's a percentage, and we might use a decimal version of that to put into our formula. We'll see that in an example in a moment. N is the number of time periods. That might be the number of months or the number of years, depending on how the interest is applied, but we'll see that in examples as well. But so there's four slots that we can put different numbers in, and we're going to substitute the numbers we have in the question, and we'll find that we tend to have 3 out of those 4 items, and we have to find that final 4th item. So that's the simple interest formula, I equals PRN. We'll have that down the bottom corner there just to refer to if we need to. Our first type of example here is simple interest, in which we are asked to find the interest. So here's our example. It asks us to use the simple interest formula, I equals PRN, to find the interest earned if $840 is invested or lent out at 6% PA, that's per annum or per year, 6% per year for 4 years. So we use that simple interest formula, I equals PRN. Now with algebra, letters that are beside, or pronumerals that are beside each other, we can imagine there's an invisible multiply in between them. So I equals PRN really means that it's I equals P times R times N. So we'll have to remember that. That's when we're using this formula. Okay, so I, that's the thing we're trying to find out. Now we're going to substitute in all the numbers underneath here. P stands for the principal, which is the amount invested in this case. Can you see that the amount invested in the question is $840? So we'll put 840 underneath the R. Now R stands for, underneath the P. R stands for the interest rate. So can you see an interest rate here, a certain percentage? Now that says 6%. We want to be using the decimal version of that, which I'm going here to tell you is 0.06. If we divide that by 100, and every percent is out of 100, 6% becomes 0.06 on your calculator. So just for a bit of simplicity, we'll put the decimal version of that interest rate in under the R, and then that is multiplied by N, the number of time periods. Can you see the time number in the question is 4 years? So we just look through the question and put the right numbers in the right spots, really. So P, we've got a P, a principal amount of money that is invested, $840. We've got an interest rate of 6%, which we turned into a decimal, and we have a time period which is 4 years. So in this case, we're just multiplying those out on our calculator, and we get an interest that has been earned from lending someone $840. It has returned $201.60 to the person who lent out their $840. Now we were asked in a sentence form, so we put that sentence there. The simple interest earned in this situation is $201.60. So we use the formula there. We put the formula on the first line. The second line involved us subbing in all the numbers we've got from the question, and we did convert that percentage into a decimal, and then we just used our calculator. So that is how to find interest when we've got that as the missing bit in our formula. Example 2, this one is finding interest again, but there's a bit of a twist to this one. This asks us to use the simple interest formula, I equals PRN, to find the interest earned if $2,100 is invested at 2% per month. So read the question nice and carefully, and we have to respond to the fact that there is a per month interest rate there for 3 years. So it's a bit weird here. We have a per month interest rate, but we have a time period quoted in years. Okay, how do we respond to that? The interest rate is given per month, and the number of time periods must match that. So it's important that our interest rate quote per month or per year matches the number of time periods we have here. We can't use months for interest rate and years for the time period, or vice versa. They have to match each other. So we're going to convert 3 years into 36 months and use 36 as our number for our n in our formula, so that our interest rate is per month and the time periods quotes a number of months as well, so that those two things are kind of using the same units. So we've turned 3 years into 36 months. Each year is 12 months. 3 12s are 36. So we do that first, and then we can put the right values in our I equals PRN situation. Remember, they're multiplying between those items, principal, rate, and number of time periods. So once again, we're trying to find the interest, so we'll leave I as I at the moment. Can you see the principal, the amount of money invested or borrowed here? 2,100. The interest rate is 2% per month, so what's the decimal of 2%? The decimal of 2% is 0.02. We'll use that version, the decimal version of that percentage. 0.02, and the number of time periods we said, we're going to use 36, not just 3, because we have to match up the interest rate quote and the number of time periods. They have to be talking the same language, really. So times 36, and the final amount of interest earned there is $1,512, and we'll write it out as a sentence. So a couple of key bits there. We once again turn 2% into a decimal, and so that we have months for the interest rate and months for the time period, we converted 3 years into how many months? So you can use your calculator there if you need to. 3 times 12 is 36. So it's 36 that goes in here, even though the question had 3, so that we're talking months in both cases. Once again, you'll notice the pattern here. We put the formula on the one line. The second line underneath, we subbed in all the numbers we had in the question, and then we calculated our answer. Alright, so a little bit of a twist there. Example 3, now this time we're trying to find an interest rate. We're trying to find the interest rate, the percentage that is missing in the question. Really, we'll have all the other 3 items. The example is $900 is invested for 6 years and earns $270 interest. Find the rate of simple interest per annum. Okay, let's see how that pans out. Once again, we'll start with our formula. Once again, we'll remember that we're multiplying in between those items in the simple interest formula. Can you see that a certain amount of interest has been earned in the question? $270. So this is the first example where we know that amount of interest that's been earned. So we'll put 270 under the I. Do we have a principal, an amount of money invested or borrowed in the question? Yep, 900. So we'll put that under the P for principal. We don't have an interest rate yet. That's the one we're trying to find out. So we'll just leave that one as R. And can you see a number of time periods there? 6 years, so we'll put the times 6 in. So we're just filling in the formula, or just the line underneath the formula anyway, with all the numbers that we have so far. Now, we need to find the interest rate on its own. So we'll need to move that $900 that's multiplying and that 6 that's multiplying. When you're solving equations, we'll solve this little equation and get R on its own here. When you're moving numbers, when you're solving equations, you have to do the opposite to both sides. So to move that, so to get the R on its own, I'm going to move a 900 that's multiplying and I'm going to do the opposite of that on both sides. I'm going to divide by 900 on the right hand side, and I'll have to divide by 900 on the left hand side. So that will cancel out the 900 on the right hand side because we have a 900 that's multiplying and a 900 that's dividing. That should cancel each other out. That's why we did it. Now if we want to move the times by 6 so that r is on its own, what's the opposite of timesing something by 6? Let's divide by 6 on both sides, on the right hand side and the left hand side. On that right hand side, a times 6 and a divide 6 will cancel out, and you can see why I've done that. I want to get that r on its own on that right hand side. So if we do into our calculator 270 divided by 900 divided by 6, we'll get that answer 0.05, and by cancelling out all the other numbers we get r on its own. So we find that r for interest rate there. Now when we swap that over, we'll just make the r on the left hand side here. Now that is a decimal, but the question kind of asked it in a, well, it usually wants a percentage for a simple interest rate. So what we're going to do is turn a decimal into a percent. Can you remember from your previous studies? To turn a decimal into a percent, we multiply by 100 to make a percentage there. So when we multiply by 100, what that does is moves the decimal point 2 jumps to the right, and you can see that we will make a final answer there of 5%. So we have to remember that when we get a decimal answer for these questions, finding interest rates, when we get a decimal answer, we'll times it by 100 to turn it into a percent. We kind of we want to work in percents in the end there. So we've found that after working with the simple interest formula there, that the rate of simple interest under those arrangements that's described in the question, the rate of simple interest is 5% per annum. So what did we do again? Okay, we put the formula, the simple interest formula, on the first line. We subbed in all the numbers on the second line. Then, rather than just calculating, we did have to do a bit of solving of an equation. Okay, we had 900 timesing by r and 6 multiplying by r, which we had to get rid of, or sort of undo, by doing the opposite to both sides there carefully. So write it out carefully. Don't be afraid to show you're working so you know what you're doing. But we've got r on its own. When you get a letter on its own, when you've got a lot of numbers around there, that's called solving an equation by doing the opposite to both sides. So that step's pretty similar to the previous one, except we did have to do a bit of equation solving in order to get r on its own there, because it had numbers all the way around it. Alrighty, finding the time period here. This is an example that asks us to find how many time periods are needed. This question says, for how long must $1,800 be invested at 7% per annum in order to earn $567 interest? So we've got a principal amount here, we've got an R for interest rate, and we've got an I for the amount of interest earned, and we are trying to find how long, how many time periods. That's the one we're trying to find. How many time periods are needed for that investment to earn that sort $567 interest. Alright, let's go with the formula again, and remember we're multiplying through. Let's fill in our second line with all the numbers we have from the question. We had an interest that's been earned of $567. We'll pop that under the I. We have a principal amount that's involved in the question. That number that was invested was $1,800. We do know an interest rate this time, and we'll turn it into a decimal from the percent. 7% is 0.07 as a decimal. And so we have all the numbers so far, but we do not know what n is. So we will need to get n on its own to answer this question. Can you see which two numbers we'll need to move? We'll need to move this 1800 that is multiplying and this 0.07 that is multiplying as well. How do you undo or move a number that's multiplying? You need to divide both sides by that. So to move that $1,800, we'll divide by 1800 on the right hand side and the left hand side. On the right hand side, that 1800 and the one that's dividing will cancel each other out, which is good because we want to get the n on its own here. We want to also move the 0.07, so we'll divide by 0.07 on the right hand side and the left hand side, and on the right hand side that multiplying 0.07 and the dividing 0.07 will cancel each other out. Can you see now how that's allowed us to get n on its own? So into our calculator we'll put 4.567 divided by 1800 divided by 0.07. When we do that carefully, we get 4.5 as a value for our n. So n is 4.5 and n is the number of time periods. We were working in per annum interest rate here, so our question is set up for years. So 4.5 as an answer for n indicates 4.5 years. And in our sentence that we'll write out, we could say that in order to earn $567 interest, $1,800 must be invested at 7% per annum for a period of 4 years and 6 months, we could say. Seeing 4.5 years is half a year, and half a year is 6 months. We could turn it into that if we like, or we could just say 4.5 years. But answer in sentence form if you're asked the question in sentence form. So what happened there? We had a formula. We had all the numbers subbed in on the second line. Then we had to do some solving of an equation. We had to move the 1800 and the 0.07 by doing the opposite to both sides to leave the n on its own. Okay, quite a bit happening there. That's how we find a time period. Let's have a look at finding a principal this time. Now this one's got a bit of a twist in it, so we'll be careful in watching this example. How much needs to be invested? In this one we're trying to find the principal. How much needs to be invested in order to earn $100 if we have an 8% per annum interest rate over 7 months? Okay, I wonder how we respond to that 7 months. Although the interest rate is quoted as 8% per annum over here, one of the issues we have to deal with is the fact that the investment is only over 7 months. So we have another situation where we have a yearly, well this time it's a yearly interest rate quoted, but an amount of months for the number of time periods. And can you see that that's not matching? A bit like a previous example there. So we have to adjust for this by expressing the time period this time in years. So if the interest rate percent is 8% per year, we need the 7 months to be talking years as well. So what we do is 7 months, we say, well, what fraction of a year is that? We say it's 7 out of the 12 months in a year. So it's 7/12 of a year, or we could say it's 7/12 years, really. It's not half a year, but it's just a bit more than that. So our n value for our I equals PRN, we're going to put in 7/12, so that's talking years, so it matches up with the interest rate talking years. Bit tricky, but that's how we're going to do it. We're going to remember that our n value, I'll transfer this to the next screen, our n value in this case is 7/12 because we didn't want to leave it as 7 months, so we wanted it to match up to the per annum or per year interest rate. So let's just transfer that over to start our calculations, but we're going to be using n for our number of time periods value. I equals PRN, we're multiplying, remember. Do we have an interest rate, an interest amount that is in the question? Yep, we want to earn $100, so that's our interest amount. So we'll put that under the I. Do we have a principal? No, we're trying to find the principal, so we'll just leave that as P. Do we have an interest rate for putting under the R? Yep, the interest rate is 8% per annum, but remember, how did we express it? Instead of a percentage, we turned it into a decimal, didn't we? 0.08 is what we want to put in for the R there. And that's the number of time periods that we thought through on the previous screen there. N equals 7/12. So that's going to go okay here because this interest rate here is per annum, and this is a quote of how much of a year do we have. So they're both talking years, those two items there, which will get us out of trouble. Once again, we want to get P on its own, so we're going to be dividing both sides by 0.08. That's going to cancel those two out there. Then we're also going to, how do we move a 7/12? That's multiplying. Well, the opposite of multiplying by 7/12 is dividing by 7/12, which we'll do on both sides. And we'll cancel that out on the right hand side, leaving us with P on its own. So into our calculator, we'll carefully put 100 divided by 0.08 divided by 7/12 on your fraction button. Pressing equals there, you get the fact that we need the principal, in order to earn $100, we need the principal, the amount of money to be invested, as $2,142, and we see you have a long decimal here. Now we're working in dollars and cents, so it's logical for us to only have 2 decimal places in the end. So we'll round that up. We'll round that 5 up to a 6. Carefully with your decimals there. Because that 7 is 5 or more, that raises the score on the 5 and turn it into a 6. So that's just rounding that off to 2 decimal places. And we have $2,142.86 that would need to be invested in order to earn $100 at that amount. We'll round it off to 2 decimal places because that makes sense. In order to earn $100 interest at 8% over 7 months, that amount, $2,142.86, needs to be invested. Okay, we've had a look at an example where we've found interest, we've found the principal, we've found the interest rate and the number of time periods. So that runs through all the different ways we can do it. Notice the interesting method there, but similar pattern to each here. We've got a formula on the first line, we sub in all the numbers we've got from the question, and in the last couple of examples we've had to solve the equation. That solving of the equation is, this bit here is the solving of the equation, whereby we are doing things to both sides in order to get the letter on its own. That's just like the equations chapter. Alrighty, well, we've covered a lot of ground there. Let's just recap. I is the amount of interest, P is the amount of amount borrowed or lent, that's the principal. R is the interest rate per period in decimal form. We turn it from a percentage to a decimal. The number of time periods, that has to match the way the interest rate is expressed. The general pattern of solving these things is to put the formula on one line. On the line underneath we sub in all the numbers, and then we solve the equation often. Sometimes we just get to calculate, but often we have to solve the equation to get the letter on its own. We saw a couple of interesting things. When we're finding an interest rate or an R in the formula, we take the decimal we get in our answer and we multiply by 100 because we prefer to have a percentage interest rate as our final bit. So if we get 0.05 in our question, we could times that by 100 and that gives us 5%. That's what we did in one of those examples, didn't we? Alright, what else did we see there that's a bit interesting? Example 2, we had 2% per month, but we started off with 3 years. And so what we did is we converted 3 years into 36 months so that we had months for both the interest rate and the number of time periods. It's best if they match up. If one's in if one's in months, the other should be in months. If one's quoted in years, the other one should be quoted in years. And considering that, if the interest rate we saw in that last example there, if the interest rate is per annum but the time period's only in months, we can think of what fraction of a year do we have. 7 months is 7 out of the 12 months, so it's really 7/12 of a year. So if we want that 7 months to be talking the same language as the percentage interest rate per annum, then 7/12 is the end value we put in that final example. So they're just the tricks of the trade there for simple interest. But it gets you out of trouble if you can put the formula on one line and know where the numbers go, so you can sub in all the numbers on the second line and then try and solve the equation, get the letter that you're trying to find on its own. So there's one of each type of example there. The video's gone on for a while there, but you've seen everything you need to know for simple interest there. I'm hoping that helps. And that's a video, and peterblakemaths.com for some more videos, but I'll get out of your way now and we'll catch you next time for some more great videos. All the best with simple interest.